Yep.
Another week, another day.
Yeah.
Excited for this conversation. So today on episode 12, what we're going to do is just continue the conversation from episode 11. We started out talking about the difference between guilt and shame, and also we touched on forgiveness.
Being ashamed.
Mm-hmm. But the response and the conversations that came after that episode, for me, just was really eye-opening and enlightening, and it kind of sparked this, like, why not go deeper? I mean, it sparked conversation of just diving into, where does shame come from? And for us personally, how have we moved through shame? Yeah, we had one of my friends talk about being in shame comes from being shamed by somebody. And I think that sparked dialogue of maybe even you disagreeing a little bit with that, or...
Yeah, we didn't really disagree. I was unclear. So what I'm learning, part of my growth arc, is learning to listen to understand. Mm-hmm. And so I think what the feedback was is people shame you, and then you live in that shame. And it's not always something that comes from you doing or not doing something. Sometimes it's put on you. Mm-hmm. And so it feels the same, but how do you process that? For example, when they were a child, something was said to them that shamed them. Mm-hmm. And so living with that shame into adulthood was something that they've been working to overcome.
Yeah, I think, so we want to just go deeper into this whole subject. And what I discovered about my own shame is how it's connected to my rage. And I didn't, something I learned, I was reading in an article.
Oh, good. I'm not laughing. I'm thinking about the rage because I don't see you as a person that has rage.
Right. Well, it's in there. It comes out in, I don't know, ways that even surprise me, I guess. I was reading an article in Psychology Today, and it talked about how shame is a binding emotion. So it attaches itself to other emotions, rage, anger, fear,
sadness,
anxiety, all of that stuff. And so what it does is it's a freeze emotion. It prevents us from processing those emotions and letting them actually come out of our bodies. It stays in our bodies. Huh. And so that's something today I'd love to go deeper into, is let's really identify shame and what it feels like, what it looks like, what it, all of the above.
I was just thinking is, what if the root of that, and I don't know the answer to this, but what if the root of shame is actually fear? Mm-hmm. And so those things emanate out of that. It's not binary. It's all mixed together.
Totally. It is. I mean, it's on a spectrum. And that would make sense in terms of fear because I think it hits on the point that no matter who you are as a human, the feeling of not belonging or the fear of not belonging can be detrimental.
In Jesus and his teachings, he said a lot of times, don't be afraid. Mm-hmm. Often, do not fear. He talked more about fear than he did about shame, but I don't want to chase that. I was just thinking it's maybe they're kind of one and the same. Yeah, it is. It's interesting to ponder.
Well, so let's get in more to that then, like the defining our chains. This guilt, the shame. Like when we actually look at it from a psychological standpoint, or even a physiological standpoint with shame, I'd ask you, where do you feel like you feel shame in your body?
It's almost the same feeling of that fight or flight feeling for me.
Well, that's what it is.
It's a whole physiological adrenaline dump kind of feeling.
Yeah.
It's almost even physically jars you.
Yeah, definitely.
And then it settles into kind of a dread.
Does it feel heavy to you?
Heavy. You know how when you get scared suddenly, if somebody sneaks up on you, just well, whatever that dump of chemicals that happens in your body, it's that. And another element of shame is it's exhausting. It's just an exhausting place to be. But it's not just physiological. There's just a whole lot going on when you feel shame.
Yeah, I was also reading how shame is like, can be this discrepancy between how you project yourself to others and to the world versus who you really are at your core, like your hidden self that like not a lot of people see. And so there's this almost like this internal battle. And so again, it hits on, I'm not good enough, I'm wrong, I don't belong. And for me, like that would show up too with like humiliation, you know?
Yeah.
It's like when you're a kid and just the comments and the mean,
or the looks.
Yeah, and the mean thing and the mean questions or the things that people point out on you. It's like it can sound so ridiculous, and it might not even be quote unquote mean or they're not making fun of you, but it harbors and it stays with you.
Well, yeah, when I was after Mom's cardiac arrest and I was having those super debilitating panic attacks, it was you'd go to the emergency room because you thought you were dying. You're laying there, looking at the bright lights, and you watch the doctors and nurses looking at each other like, this guy's nuts. There's nothing wrong with him, and you can see the eyes going back and forth like, why is this guy here?
Yeah.
And so you internalize it. What's wrong with me?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. It's weird. It doesn't have to be a major thing like sexual abuse or that you killed somebody or you maligned them. It can be little things in your life that we go to that place.
Well, and I think it's shame, it's a storehouse. It's if what psychologists are saying is if it binds and it harbors, then it stays in your body, and it has no place to go. Like, and it's it's hitting. It does either it's a perceived threat or it's an actual threat of like, because it does trigger your fight or flight. But if it's staying in your body, think about all the times in your entire life, all of your experiences of it just accumulating, and then how it then ends up coming out.
It's a good metaphor, the storehouse. And so the part of the healing and growth in what we're talking about, which we'll get to, is how do you empty the storehouse?
Yeah.
What are ways that storehouse needs to be diminished?
When you name the shame, it connects your left hemisphere and your right hemisphere of your brain. And it's when you have that bridge, you're able to then have the language to ground yourself in those emotions. You're not just completely in your head. You're then able to like hopefully get into your body, if that makes sense.
For me, it's speaking the truth about something can give it life or it can diminish it. If you go, I have shame, you could get more shame, or you can go, I have shame and I'm going to do something about this. So you have this power in your tongue, but also in your mind about that. The words you say in your mind and in your spirit can be as powerful as what you say out loud.
Right.
Anyway.
Well, and I just made me, that kind of triggered a memory for me is how I dealt with my emotions as a kid. They were so big and so powerful. I was super passionate, super sensitive. You said true. I could just you could look at me and I would bawl my eyes out.
I remember one time we were in Nashville at the Opryland Hotel, and you guys were little, and you were running all over the place, and I forget what I was afraid of, that you guys were going to tear something up or were going to be out of control and make us, quote, look bad. This was my stuff, not y'all's stuff at all. But you ran by me and I snatched you up kind of aggressively, and it hurt you. I don't know if you remember that. I think I
do remember that.
That hurt you in a way, and I immediately regretted it, and I hugged you real tight and all that, and I think I might have apologized at them, but if I didn't, I do now. But it was like you were so sensitive,
right,
that you can put something on somebody without even knowing that you're doing it.
Yeah, and so that dynamic of, parent and child, I feel like as a parent, you're just having, I'm not a parent myself yet, but I've been around a lot of kids and talking to you and stuff like that and other friends who have kids, like, you're learning as you go too, and there's stuff that you're working on, and as parents you have power over your children, rightfully so. You're the parent, you should have that power, but oftentimes unconsciously parents either dismiss a child's comment or behavior. They there's a disconnect or there's neglect, and then the child perceives that as shame. Like, okay, when I acted and cried over everything, there was usually, it wasn't positively received. So I took that and harbored that, in my storehouse of shame of like, I'm wrong because I get upset with X, Y, Z. And then that carried on. And again, the aha moment for me this week was that attaching to rage and why I had so much rage and, growing up and why I still even struggle with that. Like if shame is attached to that because that rage, I didn't know how to handle that. I see that with Marley now, now.
Well, generationally, I was thinking about my dad. And where the rage that you experience, you're responsible for what you do with your rage. But my father was abused and neglected as a child. He was left alone in a garage with his brother. And then they grew up in this hyper-religious environment where you shouldn't feel angry. Mm-hmm. You shouldn't feel this. Don't be mad. Don't be sad. And so he didn't have an outlet. Mm-hmm. But then when he grew up, the only way that he could really process some of that at times was rage. Would you say then that the way that manifested for him later on was his inability to connect with y'all? Maybe, but that's true. But also, I've often wondered where my anger came from. Mm-hmm. So some of it is generational, I think. Yeah, there's a lot of proof for that. But some of it is, okay, so it's generational. Do I have to can I break this chain here that connects me to all of that? Right, and process it. Yeah. What do you think about this? It made me think of, again, this article was pretty awesome in Psychology Today about how oftentimes with shame, we either get really hyper conscious and like self-aware to the point where that creates a lot of anxiety and overthinking, or the opposite, where you almost disconnect and disengage from your body. And then on top of that, both can be happening at the same time. Well, I was thinking of, if you want to look at a generational thing that's going on in Gen Z a lot, I'm thinking of my grandkids. Mm-hmm. What you're talking about is true. It's an and with them. It's both of those things are going on. Yeah, and so imagining that internal wrestling on a spiritual level, on just a physiological level, like if that's constantly at battle, like it makes sense that things are as chaotic as they are, and so it's this unprocessed emotion, and how do we move through it? How do we... Thinking down the road, if you take a person that's in that environment, didn't grow up in a stable place, or maybe they did, mm-hmm. This doesn't have anything to do with economics or anything like that. You could be wealthy and be going through this, or dirt poor going through it. But you grew up in this environment where you weren't taught how to handle those things. Mm-hmm. The feelings of guilt and shame and rage and all that. Mm-hmm. And then you go have a family. What's your baseline? Right. Well, and it's then it's just the vicious cycle. And it's a person who feels shame is more than likely going to shame others. Yeah. Because, what else do you know? Oftentimes you can see I can see shame on people. The slack, kind of shoulders down, the eyes are down. There's just this like slumped over kind of feel, what I mean? And it's again, it's hitting on like this
it almost like people out of protection, like they isolate, like they do not, that feeling is so painful of feeling like outcasted that it's like, well, I don't want to feel this. So you are, distraught and you almost are like, stay away from me. And I feel like compared to someone who's, chest out, you always say that, like stick your chest out and stand tall.
Swag.
And be brave and all that stuff. But you can see shame. Like you can, if you're paying attention, you can see that on somebody. I think what then I do is when I recognize and understand a little bit more about shame and where I'm coming from, like me personally, like, okay, then how do I move through it?
That is the question. Now I have awareness.
Mm-hmm.
So what do I do now? What's the next step for me? What I would encourage us to do here is reflect on this. Mm-hmm. This is not an instant gratification, microwave kind of process of growth that we go through here. Mm-hmm. This is, you bring it to the front. You reflect on it. Things like considering the way these chains have shaped you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So in episode 11, you touched on your journey with your weight and shame and then awareness and coming into self-discipline. Like, is there another story in your life or an experience that you had where you were ashamed or in shame or guilt, and how did you move through that?
Yeah, I won't go into all of the details, but when Mom was recovering from her cardiac arrest and all of that, ultimately it took 5 years. But in the immediate aftermath of all of that, I was very tempted to have an affair, and I knew from the beginning that I had made a vow to your mom to be faithful, but there was so much going on in our lives that we had zero control over that I was looking for something stable.
Or like an out? Like, I know you had talked about being afraid that Mom was going to die on you, because she did.
Maybe it was an out. I didn't think that. I did realize how different she was when she came back, and the brain injury and some things like that.
Didn't the doctor say, like, how many couples don't?
Yes, the doctor said that 85% of couples that go through of an event like that don't survive. Their marriage does not make it. We had made a commitment to each other that come hell or high water, we were going to not do what our parents did. We were going to gut it out, fight it out, do whatever we had to. Well, when real life smacked us in the face, that kind of went to the background. I went, this is too much. I'm looking for somebody that can comfort me, that's healthy, that's not going to die. Anyway, I knew from the beginning that was a path I should not go down, but I pursued it.
Mm-hmm. Did you immediately, if you knew that in the beginning, were you immediately like guilty? Feeling guilty?
Well, that's the thing. So all the stuff we're talking about, there's a twinge in your head, in your thinking. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, that's something I'm thinking about. Nobody knows I'm thinking it. It'd sure be nice, but I'm not going to say it out loud. So that little conflict in your thinking happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But then immediate gratification and I want what I want, don't you tell me I can't do what I want, kicks in too. At least it did for me. And I'm going to go see if I can make this happen. And so I started down that path. All the while, that's where some of being ashamed of my thoughts. How can you do this to your wife? How can you do this to the mother of your kids? The finger pointing, which was me, I think, pointing it at myself, going, you know better than this. Mm-hmm. You were taught differently than this.
So do you think it was hitting on you as who you were as a person or what you were doing? Like
both, I think.
Yeah. So then what happened?
Well, I went down that path, and then at some point I went, okay, we're at this impasse now. Either you're going to go forward or you're going to not go forward. So one day I sat down and wrote out a list of the people that would be affected by me doing this, directly and indirectly. And the ripple was huge. It was 400 people. And I went, for some reason, it's not worth it. Mm-hmm. my relationship with God, my relationship with myself, my relationship with my spouse, my children, all these people who had come to me for advice in similar situations that I had counseled to do the noble, right thing would be a slap in their face. And ultimately, it was me having to live with myself, knowing the truth and knowing what was right and wrong in that situation.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I remember years ago you talking to me about that journey and experience, and I think for me, like, that's where when we're talking about bridging the gap and just our dynamic, like when your parents like share things about them in the way that y'all started to,
Right.
because y'all weren't always as open, rightfully so. Like there's things that you just don't tell your kids.
Yeah, you don't tell a 4-year-old that you want to have an affair.
right. But that, I think, it went in our journey with us growing and healing, and it really started to heal and bring me closer to you and to Mom, of just seeing your humanness, like seeing your frailties and your imperfections. And I had almost in an unhealthy way, I feel like, put y'all on this pedestal. Your parents can do no wrong. Your dad's your hero. Your mom's this, whatever. Right. And y'all have just been so open and honest about your marriage and life in that time, where now, like, as we all reflect, the other kids were all reflecting about our past, and we all have these different versions of that. But seeing what y'all are going through, it just, for me, it kind of brought y'all back down on this.
We were real human beings.
Yeah. And then it also, like, I had to unravel, my idea of what a marriage or a relationship is going to look like for me, because it's not going to be yours and Mom's relationship. Right. But I've seen y'all fight through some of the toughest things with Mom's heart attack, with losing Bailey. Like, I've seen y'all fight, and I used to have all this fear, and I still do, I think, but I've seen it's kind of come full circle for me, where I've had this fear of, like, I'm never going to be able to find someone who's willing to fight like y'all fight for your marriage. And then what I started to realize several years ago is, like, wait a second, it's not that I fear me not finding someone else, it's that I fear that I won't be able to live up to that. It's had me, like, have to point the mirror at myself and say, okay, how do I unpack my own issues with not feeling good enough? Or, like, would I ever be able to do something like you did with that, So if we
relate that, if we loop that back around to what we're talking about with all these feelings, emotions, thoughts, part of the key to us growing and getting free from those things has been vulnerability.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Which you have to be careful with this. Please hear me on this, people listening. I'm not saying go spill your guts to just everybody and anybody, but find people that you can trust and be as open and as transparent as you can. It takes practice. Some people, it's easier to be open and transparent. You and me, for example, our wiring is such that we're external processors. We don't hold a lot of things inside. We do some. I don't have a lot of secrets.
Right. Yeah.
But you take, say, Jordan, my son. He holds things internally. So for him to be vulnerable is a lot more challenging. Mm-hmm. But everybody can find a place like that. You have to practice trust. And that's really hard when you've been burned repeatedly over and over in your life, to create this wall where you do not trust, where you are not vulnerable. You can unlearn those things and relearn other things. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of moving us from this feeling of being chained or captured to liberation and freedom with practice. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about physically, mentally, and spiritually, practicing things that liberate us. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Mm-hmm. How we think about ourselves, telling ourselves the truth about who we are, both good and bad, and then taking that and using it as opportunity to evolve and to grow.
Well, okay, so then back to just you talking about wanting to cheat and all of that stuff. Like, so you make this list. It's not like, okay, now everything's great, it's going to affect everyone, throw the list away, and then I turn the other way. Like, now that you're years past that, how did you break those chains, and how is it now reflecting on that and seeing that? Like, do you ever feel shame still for that?
I do feel regret. That, by the way, that journey was about a 10-year journey.
Wow.
And it wasn't something that happened overnight, and it wasn't something that changed overnight. There was an event where I said, I'm not going to do this. And as my relationship with God grew stronger, and I started understanding intimacy with the creator of the universe, I went, I'm not going to do anything that jacks that up. And so I had to choose. When you start telling yourself the truth, it can even create more shame and more guilt if you don't do something with it. I know I need to change. I know I need to go down a different path than the one of cheating on my wife. But wait a minute, I don't want to do that. I want to cheat. I want to do this. It's exciting. I'm sneaking around, getting away with this, quote unquote. Nobody knows except us, but you know it. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. What are some practical ways that we have broken free of the shame? Or what are there things that you do, Dad, that help you ground, and you know what I mean? Like,
what is we talk about it all the time. What do you can't change if you don't know you need to. So one day you wake up and you're in your mid-30s and you're laying awake at 3 o'clock in the morning looking at the ceiling. You can't sleep. You're going, there's got to be something more than what I'm doing or not doing right now. Why do I feel so stuck here? Why do I keep going around the mountain? And so then you start having this awareness that you don't know everything you need to know. For me, that happened in my mid-30s and again when I was in my early 40s. Is this all there is? I mean, my kids will be gone in 10 years. Lori and I will be alone. What are we doing? Is this the only purpose in my life, is to go to work in a warehouse as a supervisor on third shift and slog out products for the rest of my life, So it's like, so part of that is having the nature of change is you have to know you need to before you can. But then you have to want to. You have to want to change. And even knowing that you need to and wanting to, and having desire to do it, isn't actually changing. You have to have the tools and the knowledge to change. So you're going to say something.
Well, but you were just saying earlier that you didn't want to change.
Right. So you might have to get miserable enough to go, you know what? It's not worth it.
Yeah.
Like I did.
Yeah.
It's not worth it to stay in this situation. You've got your own version of that with relationships, with your sexuality, all those things. You have to kind of think about, okay, if I can't change on my own, what are some of my options here?
Yeah.
And for me, it was get help. For me, it was, what if I align myself with somebody that's maybe a little older than me that's been down this road before that can help me?
Well, and that's where I think it's encouraging, for me at least, having older friends who are open and honest about their life experience. My friend Jane in PA, like, just to hear someone who has lived, I mean, you too, and Mom, like, y'all have lived so much longer than I, and to see that y'all have walked through and tripped and stumbled along the way, but to be open and honest for that, like, for me, like, seeing my elders in that space, again, it brings it all down. It's humbling.
Right. But I see you doing that with people that are younger than you now.
Yeah,
I see you do it with with my grandchildren. I see you doing that and modeling that for people that are younger than you and your peers as well. It's never linear. It's almost always, you might be going north, but you're going like this. It's never usually just a beeline to where you're going.
Right. I want to talk a little bit about just simple exercises that we can do, whether we're processing shame, whatever the emotion is. Again, I think a lot of that, it lives in our heads, but then it manifests in our bodies. Right. And so there's a connection there.
So let's do this. We've talked about shame a lot. We get it, right? We all have it, right, to one degree or another. We can get free of it. We can live a life that's liberated, and that we have freedom, or not. You can choose to stay there. But let's assume that we all don't want to stay in an environment and context of shame. Mm-hmm. Well, okay, what are some things that we can do to move from there to freedom? Mm-hmm. What have you done?
So one of the things that has helped me in my healing journey is getting clear in my mind.
Okay. So what does getting clear in your mind mean to you?
A lot of that was I had to quit drinking. I had to quit smoking weed. I had to change my diet. It was very practical things where, I've struggled with a lot of brain fog. Uh-huh. And so I had to actually go through a journey of dissecting that and finding what was at the root of that.
Okay, so you had to get clear. Once you got some clarity, then what was another step that you took?
I think a big thing for me was learning how to relate and connect with my body.
Okay. Talk more about that. In what ways?
Breathing. We talk about that a lot. I think breathing really has helped me. Well, let me say this. Intentional breathing has really helped me process emotions by getting grounded in my body. Something I do regularly when I pray or when I meditate, it's having both feet on the ground. It's touching my chest and feeling my chest.
Awareness of how you are breathing.
Mm-hmm. And again, I think a lot of us live in here in our headspace.
Yeah.
When I go hike, it's practicing actually being on the hike.
Right.
Usually we're a million other places. So it's the presence piece of be here right now, get in your body. When you can pull yourself out of your mind and get into your body, again, I think it creates it, for me, it has helped create an anchor point.
How did you start that road of freedom?
A lot of that would be acceptance with where I'm at. That I'm on a journey, and there's a side of me in my thinking that I just want to be good at it.
Right.
I want to be finished. I want this to look how I want it to look in my head. The journey part is okay, can I accept with where I'm at right now? Yeah. And that I'm in suspension and I'm not exactly where I want to be.
So is it okay to not be finished?
Well, yeah, right? That's all of life, right?
Yeah, some people don't like that, though. It's hard to handle it.
I don't like that either. So again, how, getting to a place of acceptance. And again, that for me, it's still, I'm still on that journey of accepting where I'm at. It's how many times did I have to go through one thing for it to stick? And sometimes I spent years, my breakup in Port Angeles, we broke up, and then it was another 3 years before I felt like I had my heart back. Right. And that was 3 years of me going back into the chaos over and over again.
It's a constant process. Mm-hmm. It's the slow work. One has to work at getting comfortable with it being something that is never done.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that for me, breaking free of the shame, the rage, which again is something I'm currently in, is coming back to the truth. Right. of and loving myself through it. I think self-love is a big one. It's not just accepting yourself.
Yeah.
The hardest person to forgive has been myself.
When you were starting to get clarity, what were some little steps you took to get that clarity around in your mind? So when you went, okay, I can't go out, party, drink every night, smoke weed every day, and have clarity. How did you start that process of change?
saying no to myself, leaning on God. I can't do it myself. Most people who are in any kind of recovery, there's whether you believe in God or not, there's this acceptance that you can't do it by yourself.
Right.
You can't do it alone.
Yeah. Was that hard?
Oh yeah. I'm an independent woman. I can do it all. I don't need help with any of. I mean, I've done that my whole life. So yeah, to surrender and let go and say, okay, I'm going to trust God, even in this place of not trusting God.
Right.
The paradox, right? Of like, even though I'm uncomfortable, I don't trust God, I'm still choosing to trust God. It's like, how can we be in both places like that? But
right. Like you said, whether you believe in God or not, almost every 12-step program that exists in the world starts with, I was unable to change this on my own.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I'm paraphrasing that, but realizing that you did not have the power to change some of this by yourself. Mm-hmm. So you had to lean on God for that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that was expressed in my imagination, my intuition, and my creativity.
Right.
Like when I stopped my habits of me wasting time, I had to rediscover what I loved and what do I love doing.
Yeah. Well, how did you handle relapses, or when you would, okay, I'm going to do this, you start down the path, and then all of a sudden something comes back, that trauma, drama, some of your relationships, you digressed.
Mm-hmm.
How did you handle that? Like not getting back into shame, walking in forgiveness, etc.
Well, I think little by little, even though it's often we don't see our growth in real time, we are growing, but you don't realize you're getting stronger. So each time I would relapse or go back to the chaos or the drama, I would wallow and I would be in that same place. I'm like, okay, this is what has helped me and this is not what has helped me. So allowing myself to feel and be in that, and then just continuing to fall forward, I feel like.
Yeah. When you said that, it made me think of not doing all of this in a vacuum. You do have to own it yourself and have personal responsibility. One of the greatest indicators of growth is when other people see it, which to me implies that you seek out support, a 12-step program, a group of friends and supporters, a church, whatever it is. You don't do it by yourself.
And I think that's where this can lead into this came up in conversation with some friends just last night, of having grace for ourselves and for others. Like the amount of conversations, the same conversation I had with some of, like when I think of like with Darby or Jor, just because they were with me in that, the height of the chaos in Port Angeles. I mean, gosh, I sounded like a freaking broken record. And they allowed me the space to just be in that and work through it over and over again. And like, also we had the relationship and the bond where they could call me out on my shit and be like, dude, you're saying the same thing you were saying 1 year ago today. Like literally. And that's hard to hear. You're like, oh man, I am. But finding even just that one person who allows you to be in that space of mess and chaos, and y'all have to learn that together too, of creating boundaries and, all of that stuff. But like finding people who you can trust with that. At the end of the day, whether you're married or not, feel like you have friends or you don't have any, at the end of the day, it's you and yourself. You always talk about that. You go to bed at night and you're staring at the ceiling. It's just you. And for me, it's, I'm like, okay, that's the time that I'm hanging out with God. I mean, we're hanging out all the time, but God is with us on the journey. Something that Peter Gregg says that has stuck with me is God is a great delegator. He's not a great dictator. He's there to support and empower. And when I allow myself to be open to God, I feel like things are revealed to me that they only are revealed if I say yes, and we are in this space of co-creating together.
Yeah, and that whole revelation is not that you got some secret to the universe that's just yours alone, but it's from the Scripture and from what he taught when he was here, in person. Yeah, so all of those things are important.
Like, I think that just made me think of when I went through my, like, I would say, like, a lot of my ego deaths and just the healing journey in Port Angeles. That's why it's such a significant place in my life. I was clinging on to God out of desperation, but there would be moments of clarity where it's like they seem stupid or like irrelevant or just like deceptively simple, but it's like, just go create. Just go on a walk. And where that has led me, like when I think of my creative expression from then to now, has been, I mean, again, it's deceptively simple. Put both feet on your ground and put your hand on your chest. That sounds stupidly simple. But like those were little nudges, I feel like, from just the God-given intuition that is placed in us to like respond and to learn and to grow and to heal. So overall, I mean, we hit on a lot today. I thought it was pretty fun to explore and to go into, one, recognizing and naming shame.
Recognize and name shame.
Right. And then seeing it as a journey of moving through that, learning to let go of shame and come to a place of healing and forgiveness and grace and self-compassion. What are your 3 big takeaways for you, Dad?
Yeah, well, it's big. This is not a one and done kind of journey. It's constant. It's like a GPS system in an airplane or whatever. One is this is a journey. It takes time, implying that it is a journey. You're never done. That's another thing I'm taking away. And that is not a condemning thing. That's a liberating thing. We're always growing if we choose to. And the last one is being empathetic toward other people who are on that same journey with you. What are yours?
My 3. I would say overall, shame is universal and it's not your fault. That's the truth. And how do you then move from that space? 2, it's like, for me, I would say it's not just leaning on others, it's leaning on yourself and God. I mean, ultimately God, right? Like, again, he's there to empower and to listen. And for me, when I have unpacked all my trauma and issues around religiosity and legalism, and I got into the heart and intimacy of what it means to be walking with Jesus, that has changed everything. That's a long bullet point.
Yeah, but that's okay.
And I guess 3 would be to trust the whispers of things that might seem too simple. When you're healing, like, allow yourself to be open, I guess, would be like, open yourself in your mind to the infinite possibilities of ways that you can move through and heal in shame.
Yeah, that's good. We did maybe a dual 4th point would be is don't do it alone. You and God, you and community, family.
Well, and that's what we've talked about. Like, vulnerability creates more space for vulnerability, and how do we create those spaces ourselves, I guess.
Yeah. Another thing you said in there that was implied was humility.
Yeah.
Humbling yourself. This is the question. Where are you now in relation to your struggles with shame? Or whatever words you want to put in there. And the last part of it is, what is one action that you can take this week to move closer to what you want?
To breaking those chains into change.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's a good question.
And I just encourage people to Keep asking the questions, keep giving us the feedback. We're not in a hurry. I often feel like I'm in a hurry with this. Our goal is to affirm, validate, encourage, challenge, and support whoever is in our path. We don't have all those answers. We're teaching, another goal of ours is to create an environment where you can think about things. Not us feed you information and give you all these pat answers, because there aren't pat answers a lot of the times.
Well, and again, like you what you said in the beginning is like, we're living this, like it's the school of life. Like we're literally in the midst of this. This is why this topic came up, because it's obviously stuff that we're dealing with right now, you know?
Yeah.
So I love you, Dad. And we love y'all, whoever is listening, wherever you're listening. We just love you. We're sending you encouragement and just peace as you're navigating this beautiful life.
I'll say this. I love you, Hayden.
Aww.
You called during the podcast, buddy. Love you, son. Very proud of you.